Imagine drifting through a silent ocean of darkness, farther from home than any human has ever traveled, until the void begins to change. First, a faint shimmer, then a contour so impossibly large your mind struggles to understand it. A structure stretching across tens of millions of miles, swallowing the starlight around it and replacing natural beauty with pure engineering ambition. And as you drift closer, you finally see it, the inner shell of a Dyson Sphere. A megastructure so massive it wraps around an entire star like a cosmic cocoon, capturing every photon of energy and turning the heart of a sun into a controlled power source for a civilization so advanced its smallest machines are smarter than entire cities back on Earth. Yet as overwhelming as the scale is from the outside, it's nothing compared to the moment you glide through an access aperture and enter the interior. Because inside, where you expect blinding light or chaos, you find instead a world suspended in perfect balance. A hollow sphere with a star floating at its center, illuminating an entire artificial landscape that curves upward in every direction until it disappears into the glowing distance. Picture an entire city spread along this inward-facing shell, not built on a ground that stretches outward like on Earth, but pasted along the inner surface of a cosmic bowl, where the horizon is not flat, it's rising, curving upward, bending toward your eye until it feels impossible. Like you're standing inside a huge, illuminated orb, where the ground wraps above your head. The star at the center is dimmed by layers of regulation panels that soften its harsh light into a warm, golden glow. And it casts no directional shadows, just a gentle, ambient brightness that makes the city appear dreamlike, as if time itself moves slower here. Buildings are tall but delicate, made of materials that shimmer faintly as if humming with captured energy. Transportation flows silently along magnetic pathways. Rivers of condensed vapor fall upward from one region and disappear into collection grids, recycling endlessly to maintain atmosphere and humidity. And artificial clouds drift lazily along programmed weather routes that circle the entire sphere in predictable, comforting patterns. Everything is designed for calmness, precision, and harmony. Humans living here would feel like they've stepped into a limitless sanctuary where the universe finally makes sense. And yet, even in this crafted perfection, something feels slightly off. Not in an obvious way, but in the same way you sense a quiet pressure before a storm. A feeling that the stillness is hiding something you can't name. If you were standing inside this city, your body would recognize it before your mind did. A subtle warmth in the air, just a degree too high. A faint shimmer of light that lingers a moment longer than it should. The soft hum of the sphere's inner machinery taking just a fraction longer to stabilize. Nothing dramatic, nothing alarming, just small, nearly imperceptible details that suggest a system stretched a bit too close to its limit. The inhabitants don't notice it, not yet. They go about their days, walking on a surface that curves upward toward the sky. Living beneath a star they believe they fully control. But deep beneath the surface, behind the panels that regulate light, heat, and pressure, there is an imbalance beginning to form. The kind of imbalance that doesn't trigger alarms because it was never expected to happen in the first place. And that is where our story begins. Inside a city built within a Dyson Sphere, a marvel of engineering and ambition, a place designed to last millions of years, now quietly developing a hidden problem that no one inside expects, one that starts so subtly it's almost beautiful, until the moment it isn't. To understand how a city could exist inside a Dyson Sphere, you need to imagine not a machine, but an ecosystem. An engineered world so precisely balanced that every gust of wind, every drop of water, every flicker of light is calculated and placed with the same care an artist gives to a single brushstroke. From the moment you enter this inner world, you realize nothing here is accidental. The gravity beneath your feet isn't natural, but generated by the slow rotation of the megastructure itself, the entire sphere turning like a colossal hollow planet, creating a gentle downward pull that keeps oceans in place and cities anchored to the interior shell. The air you breathe is not the byproduct of forests or oceans, but the result of atmospheric processes embedded in the walls, machines that refine, redistribute, and recycle every molecule to maintain the perfect balance of oxygen, nitrogen, and humidity throughout the sphere's colossal interior volume. Sunlight, if you can call it that, isn't simply emitted from the star in the center, but carefully modulated through layered panels that filter, soften, and redirect its radiation, creating a spectrum designed to mimic the most comfortable conditions for biological life while protecting inhabitants from the raw, unforgiving power of a star at close range. These panels act like a cosmic dimmer switch, turning an explosive sphere of nuclear fusion into a gentle, constant glow that feels more like dawn stretched across eternity than the harsh noon of a typical sun. The artificial day-night cycle is controlled by rotating shields that periodically obscure part of the star's surface, ensuring residents experience the calming rhythm of light and darkness, even though no sunrise or sunset truly exists here. Instead, the city transitions gradually from golden brilliance to soft twilight, as the internal mechanisms glide into position with a silence so perfect it feels intentional, as if the entire sphere holds its breath during the shift. Water is generated and recycled through a closed-loop system. Vapor rises from engineered lakes, condenses on massive atmospheric grids high along the curved walls, then returns as gentle rainfall in carefully planned patterns, creating microclimates stitched together like fabric panels. Some regions warm and tropical, others cool and almost temperate, all tailored to sustain biodiversity, curated and selected for long-term stability. Agriculture thrives across patches of land that cling to the interior surface like upside-down continents, illuminated by optimized light frequencies that maximize plant growth while reducing energy expenditure. Even the wind feels intentional. Soft breezes flow along the curvature of the sphere, redirected by pressure regulators to circulate evenly and carry the scent of vegetation from one region to another. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is random. And beneath all this order lies the beating heart of the sphere, an unimaginable network of energy channels that transport the star's power across the city, feeding every system, every building, every artificial river with a consistency Earth could never dream of. But perfection at this scale requires more than just engineering. It requires constant vigilance. The systems must predict every fluctuation in solar output, every micro-change in internal pressure, every shift in the sphere's angular momentum. A single panel misaligned by a millimeter could disrupt thermal balance. A single delay in atmospheric regulation could alter cloud formation for an entire hemisphere. Yet as flawless as everything appears, as beautifully synchronized as each system seems on the surface, there is an underlying fragility to it all. Because when you build a world this massive, this intricate, the smallest deviation isn't just a mistake, it's a warning. And while the inhabitants walk through illuminated streets, enjoying steady warmth and perfectly moderated air, sensors buried deep within the sphere's interior have begun to detect something out of pattern. Heat rising slightly faster than predicted, energy distribution nodes recalibrating more frequently than they should, and a faint, rhythmic vibration in one of the regulation panels that wasn't there before. The city still feels calm, still feels perfect, but the sphere's internal systems are whispering a quiet message, a message no one is listening to yet. The harmony is real, but it is being held together by threads so thin that the slightest shift could unravel the entire design. And that hidden instability is the first sign of the problem no one inside expects. Daily life inside the Dyson Sphere city feels strangely familiar and profoundly alien at the same time, as if someone took the most peaceful version of Earth and stretched it across the inner surface of a cosmic cathedral. You can walk along streets lined with softly glowing structures, built from materials so light they seem to breathe, and yet strong enough to withstand the subtle but constant pull of the sphere's rotational gravity. The buildings curve upward with the ground itself, creating neighborhoods that appear to rise toward the sky, even though they're simply following the sphere's geometry. From any point in the city, if you look far enough into the distance, you don't see a horizon that fades into open air. You see the land bending upward, the distant districts shimmering overhead like a reflection on a giant celestial mirror illuminated by the star in the center that hangs motionless in every direction you turn. People here move more peacefully than on Earth. There are no loud vehicles, no frantic rush, no unpredictable shadows cast by a wandering sun. Instead, transportation glides silently over magnetic pathways, following gentle arcs along the curvature of the sphere, while personal pods float between residential zones with the smoothness of drifting clouds. Public gardens bloom under meticulously filtered light, their plants engineered to thrive in the constant glow without exhausting the soil. Towering vertical forests climb the inner walls, their roots gripping the structure like living embroidery, creating green corridors where inhabitants walk during their morning routines, breathing air that feels fresher than anything humanity has ever experienced outside this colossal machine. Markets operate on terraces that overlook the star, offering food produced in the agricultural belts that run along the sphere's interior, where crops flourish in stable temperatures and optimized light cycles that never scorch or freeze. Even leisure feels different here. People gather near the observation decks to watch shimmering auroras created by energy balancing systems high above, or stroll along reflective lakes that appear to defy gravity because their surfaces curve upward with the land, creating the illusion of water stretching vertically into the glowing distance. And yet, beneath this unbroken calm and the beauty of engineered perfection, there are subtle signs that something is slightly off, signs so minor most residents don't consciously notice them, but their bodies do. Nights have begun to feel a little warmer than usual, as if the thermal regulators are running half a step behind. Some inhabitants report waking up earlier than they intend to, sensing a faint brightness creeping through their living spaces even during designated dark cycles, a brightness that lingers just long enough to make them question whether they imagined it. Children say the air feels heavier in certain parts of the city, though humidity sensors show nothing abnormal. Farmers mention that a few crops are reacting strangely, growing faster during periods where the light should be dimmer, as if an invisible hand were stretching time. In transit pods, passengers feel an almost imperceptible tremor every few hours, a vibration that lasts a fraction of a second before fading away, like the city itself is clearing its throat. Most people dismiss these tiny inconsistencies as quirks of a megastructure far too large for humans to fully comprehend, the way Earth dwellers once shrugged off minor earthquakes or flickers in the power grid. But the sphere is not Earth. It is not a planet with room for error or natural chaos. Every anomaly here, no matter how small, means something. And as life continues in peaceful monotony, children playing under perpetual dawn-colored skies, elders sitting by lakes that appear to curve toward the heavens, workers tending to machines buried beneath gardens that never wither, the Dyson Sphere quietly absorbs more energy from its captive star than its systems were designed to handle. And the slight unease drifting through the city's routines is the first whisper of a much deeper imbalance. The inhabitants may not realize it yet, but the world they trust completely is beginning to slip out of equilibrium, one unnoticed fluctuation at a time, each one tightening the tension inside the shell of this artificial paradise. To understand why even the smallest anomaly inside a Dyson Sphere matters, you first need to understand the scale and the engineering behind such an impossible structure, because nothing about it resembles traditional construction or even the largest mega projects imagined on Earth. A Dyson Sphere is not a shell built around a star the way humans build domes or habitats. It is a gravitationally balanced, rotationally stabilized, multi-layered megastructure composed of trillions of interlocking segments, each one acting like a tile on the surface of a hollow world the size of an entire solar system. The materials used are not metals or composites found on Earth, but ultra-light, ultra-strong alloys designed at the atomic level, capable of withstanding temperature gradients that would vaporize steel and radiation levels that would tear apart conventional matter. These materials, engineered in laboratories orbiting neutron stars and refined through gravitational forging, allow the inner shell to remain thin enough to avoid collapse under its own weight, yet strong enough to endure the constant pressure of rotation and the relentless bombardment of energy from the star it surrounds. Every panel is fitted with nanoscopic actuators that adjust position in real time, maintaining perfect alignment with neighboring tiles and preventing microscopic gaps that could destabilize the sphere's internal climate. Behind the panels, networks of cooling channels weave through the structure like veins, carrying excess heat toward dissipators hidden along the sphere's outer surface, where it can be safely radiated into space. The interior ground, where the city rests, is not merely attached to the sphere, it is fused into the megastructure itself, using molecular bonding techniques that anchor buildings and landscapes to a surface that curves endlessly in all directions. Gravity is created through rotation, and to maintain a stable 1G pull, the entire shell must spin with such precision that a deviation of even a fraction of a percent could cause vertigo, structural shear, or catastrophic shifts in atmospheric flow patterns. Stabilization thrusters, each the size of mountains, are embedded deep within the outer layers and fire in carefully timed bursts that keep the sphere's rotation perfectly smooth, correcting for the slightest tug from gravitational anomalies, solar flares, or the gravitational influence of nearby celestial bodies. And then there is the star, the beating heart of the entire system, whose energy output must be predicted, captured, filtered, redistributed, and stored on a scale that dwarfs anything humans have ever conceived. Photonic collectors absorb energy, ultracapacitors store it, and regulators distribute it across the city's systems in a never-ending cycle of intake and release. If even one part of that cycle becomes misaligned, the entire balance begins to strain. This is a world built on the razor's edge of mathematical perfection. There is no room for error, no natural environment to absorb mistakes, no planetary atmosphere to buffer fluctuations. Everything is designed, measured, and executed with near-divine precision. And that precision depends entirely on the inner panels that regulate light and heat, panels that must open and close, shift and tilt, brighten and dim in synchronized harmony. When one panel falls out of sync, even by the smallest margin, it forces the others to compensate, stretching the system further than it was meant to go. The inhabitants never see any of this. They simply enjoy the results: perfect gravity, perfect air, perfect temperature, perfect illumination. But deep in the sphere's hidden infrastructure, sensors are beginning to log something engineers have long feared but never expected: subtle, irregular shifts in panel alignment, microscopic changes in thermal distribution, and energy absorption levels that do not match predicted models. The megastructure is vast, almost alive in its complexity, and like any living system, it reacts to stress, but not always fast enough. Inside this artificial paradise, built with technologies so advanced they border on the miraculous, a small imperfection is beginning to propagate quietly through the network, the way a single cracked tile in a dam can one day lead to a catastrophic breach. The engineering is magnificent, but magnificence does not equal invulnerability. and the sphere, for the first time in its existence, is beginning to strain under the weight of a problem no one inside even knows is forming. If there is one component of the Dyson Sphere that must never fail, it is the vast network of internal light regulation panels, the shimmering layered system that filters the raw fury of the star into the warm, breathable glow that fills the city. These panels operate like cosmic eyelids, adjusting their opacity millions of times per day to balance heat, illumination, and radiation across the sphere's interior. Each segment is only a few centimeters thick, but they stretch for thousands of miles, linked by a lattice of micro-actuators that shift like the scales of a living creature. Beneath their smooth surfaces, billions of nanosensors monitor temperature gradients, photonic flux, and structural tension at every millisecond, feeding data into a central system that predicts and adjusts long before the human senses ever register a change. This delicate dance of alignment, shading, and micro-filtering keeps the internal world stable. And yet, in one small region of the sphere, the choreography is starting to fall out of rhythm. At first, the changes are incredibly subtle. A panel that takes a fraction of a second longer to dim during the artificial dusk cycle, another that brightens slightly too early in the synthetic morning, or a section that absorbs a hair more energy than predicted before redistributing it into the cooling systems. None of these deviations are large enough to trigger alarms on their own. They fall within what engineers consider acceptable margins for a megastructure that endures constant stress from a living star. But the sphere's control systems do something unexpected. They begin to compensate more frequently, engaging backup algorithms that are rarely used, redistributing thermal loads with increasing regularity, and firing micro-thrusters to maintain alignment on that specific region of the interior. The system is acting like a body responding to a fever it can't yet explain. Still, no one notices. The artificial day-night cycle continues, the atmosphere remains pleasant, and the star glows with its familiar golden warmth. But if you stood close to the faulty panel, if you were the kind of curious explorer who wanders near the maintenance access shafts on the sphere's inner curvature, you would feel something the city's inhabitants can't. A faint, irregular pulse of heat radiating from beneath the surface. Not enough to burn, not enough to frighten, but enough to make the air tremble just slightly, the way pavement wavers on a hot summer afternoon. The maintenance drones stationed nearby hover with more frequency than usual, their optical sensors glowing faintly as they conduct micro-inspections, recalibrating and adjusting without fully understanding the source of the misalignment. Holographic diagnostics bloom in the air, mapping thermal patterns that ripple outward like invisible waves. The readings show small pockets of heat accumulating in ways they shouldn't, pooling behind the panel like warm breath trapped beneath a sheet of glass. Yet every time the system recalibrates, the anomaly disappears temporarily, only to return a few hours later, slightly larger. Engineers in the deeper control layers notice the pattern, but they assume it's a software quirk. The Dyson Sphere is so large and its models so complex that deviations of this scale are not unheard of. They check the structural bonds, test the actuators, analyze the sensor logs. Everything appears normal, everything appears fine, but the panel is changing. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, its molecular lattice expanding and contracting in microscopic ways as it absorbs more energy than predicted. It's like watching a glacier move, invisible in the moment, undeniable over time. And beneath that panel, the cooling channels begin to hum more intensely as they work to redirect the excess heat, pushing their capacities 0.001% harder than usual. It's an amount so small no human mind would give it meaning, but in a megastructure where equilibrium is sacred, it's the cosmic equivalent of a skipped heartbeat. No one knows it yet, but the Dyson Sphere has taken its first step toward thermal imbalance. And once one panel drifts out of perfect synchronization, the entire system begins a silent tug-of-war, each adjustment rippling outward across the inner surface like tension spreading across a tightly stretched drum. For now, the city continues to shine with peaceful golden light, but the sphere has begun to whisper a warning. Something is shifting, something is warming, and the first crack, though invisible, has already formed in the perfect harmony of this artificial world. The first real sign that the Dyson Sphere is drifting out of equilibrium doesn't come from the city itself, but from the stabilizers embedded deep within its outer shell. Massive, mountain-sized thrusters that fire in perfectly timed bursts to maintain the sphere's rotation and orientation. For centuries, these stabilizers have acted like the heartbeat of the megastructure, their rhythm so steady that even the smallest deviation is instantly noticeable to the automated systems monitoring them. And one day, without warning, a stabilizer on the far side of the sphere fires for just a fraction of a second longer than it should. The difference is so minuscule, it would take sensitive instruments to detect it, but the effect ripples through the megastructure like a soft shiver, a barely perceptible shift in rotational balance that slightly alters the pressure distribution across the inner environment. At first, the change is benign, just an imperceptible fluctuation in the artificial gravity that no human body could detect. But the sphere's internal sensors react swiftly, recalibrating to counteract the imbalance, firing adjacent stabilizers more frequently to keep the overall spin perfectly smooth. It works, but the system begins compensating again an hour later, then again 30 minutes after that, and soon every few minutes as the faulty region draws more energy than expected. The sphere's rotation is stable, but the corrections are becoming more constant, more urgent, more strained. Nestled within the inner surface of the sphere, atmospheric regulators begin to feel the effects too. Airflow patterns shift slightly, causing tiny disturbances in the circulation routes that distribute air evenly. Clouds that once drifted with programmed elegance now occasionally stutter, freezing in place for a moment before jolting forward, creating odd, windless gaps, followed by sudden breezes that confuse the automated climate controllers. A few residents feel the strange stillness in the air, but they chalk it up to being deep underground or in a windowless room. The sphere is too big, too controlled, too perfect for them to suspect anything more. Yet scientists monitoring long-term climate stability notice the anomaly, a pressure ridge forming in one region where air seems to pool unnaturally before dispersing. The readings don't match any known weather pattern and shouldn't be possible inside a perfectly regulated environment. Meanwhile, down in the megastructure's invisible backbone, the energy redistribution network, actuators begin to work overtime, rerouting excess power away from the problematic panel zone into thermal capacitors that were never meant to operate at this frequency. Their temperature rises by fractions of a degree, tiny increases that remain within safe limits, but signal that the system is compensating far more than usual. Cooling lines hum with added intensity, pushing heat away from the failing section like veins carrying fever from a sick organ. All the while, the star at the center continues to burn with unwavering brilliance, indifferent to the complex machine wrapped around it, pouring out energy that the sphere must handle with perfect precision. A momentary failure in orientation could expose an entire region of the inner shell to direct, unfiltered stellar radiation, something the panels are not meant to endure for long. And so the stabilizers keep working, firing in small, rapid bursts to hold the sphere steady, unaware that each correction strains the system further, like a tired muscle twitching to keep the body upright. The city remains blissfully unaware of the unfolding tension. Children play under softly glowing skies, workers glide along magnetic rails, gardens flourish beneath the filtered light. But if one stood atop an observation deck and looked carefully toward the far upward curve of the sphere, they might notice a faint, rhythmic flicker, light dimming and brightening in a pattern just slightly offbeat from the rest of the internal environment. It's the visual echo of the stabilizer's struggle, like the subtle sway of a massive ship, fighting a current too weak to be seen, but strong enough to demand constant correction. Engineers reviewing rotation logs notice the irregularity too. The numbers aren't alarming yet, but they reveal a trend, a slow drift requiring more frequent adjustments. They run simulations, check structural strain maps, and scan for cosmic interference, but they find no external cause, which leaves only one possibility. Something within the sphere is beginning to destabilize the equilibrium. Something under the surface, beneath the panels, within the spine of the megastructure, is pulling just slightly out of sync. And though no one realizes it yet, the stabilizers are firing more often because the Dyson Sphere is beginning to wobble in a way it never has before. A microscopic but relentless tremor that marks the beginning of a cascade the inhabitants are completely unprepared for. Heat inside a Dyson Sphere is not supposed to behave unpredictably. It is the one element the megastructure was engineered to control with absolute mastery. Absorbed, redirected, stored, released, and moderated with precision so extreme that Earth's climate systems would seem chaotic in comparison. Yet, as the faulty panels begin to drift microscopically out of alignment and the stabilizers work harder to maintain rotational equilibrium, a subtle thermal ripple begins to spread through the inner environment like a quiet tide. It starts in a place few people think about: maintenance corridors hidden beneath the city's curved surface, where automated drones glide silently through narrow tunnels lit only by soft blue strips. These corridors are normally cool, their temperatures regulated to prevent heat accumulation around structural joints. But one day, a drone pauses mid-flight, hovering as its sensors detect a rise of 0.08 degrees, tiny, insignificant by human standards, but enough to trigger a moment of recalibration. The drone adjusts its route, sends a routine report to the main system, and moves on. Nothing alarming. Nothing urgent, except that 2 hours later, another drone detects a similar increase 300 miles away, then another, halfway around the sphere. These isolated pockets of warmth are not connected geographically, yet they appear linked by something deeper, something tied to the sphere's internal energy flows. Above ground, the effects are even more subtle but far more meaningful. In one district, visitors to an indoor botanical park comment that the air feels just a little heavy, like the oxygen mixture has shifted slightly. They don't know that the temperature regulators are compensating for excess heat rising from beneath the panel network, pushing cooler air at irregular intervals to keep the gardens balanced. In residential areas, families notice that their climate modules, the systems that keep their homes perfectly comfortable, cycle on a bit earlier than usual, releasing faint, cool breezes even during the darkest hours of the artificial night. It's subtle enough that most residents don't think twice, but a few engineers living in the sector take note, wondering why energy consumption is trending upward, even though the environmental settings remain unchanged. The anomaly spreads into agriculture zones too, where crops that depend on perfectly calibrated light and temperature begin growing slightly faster than predicted. The discrepancy is minor, barely a fraction of a percent, but enough for agronomists to run diagnostic scans. They find nothing wrong because the error is not in the biology, it's in the light itself. The panels above this region are absorbing too much energy from the star before filtering it into the false sunlight that bathes the crops, warming the air just enough to accelerate plant metabolism. Meanwhile, in the sphere's hydrological system, lake surfaces glisten with an unusual shimmer during artificial night, reflecting light that shouldn't exist. The star dims completely during the cycle, but residents strolling by the lake shores swear they see faint ripples of gold dancing atop the water, as if a hidden lumen source were leaking through. Some speculate it's an artistic feature, Others think it's atmospheric refraction. No one considers the truth. The panels above them are failing to fully darken, allowing microscopic amounts of stellar radiation to leak through. The central control AI begins detecting patterns too. Cooling networks in that region are activating in tighter intervals, draining heat faster than before and transferring it into backup reservoirs designed only for emergency use. These reservoirs hum quietly as they fill faster than they were ever meant to, their internal temperatures creeping upward while still remaining below automated alert thresholds. The AI has been programmed not to panic. It adjusts, compensates, reroutes. But the patterns are unmistakable. Heat is pooling in strange ways, traveling through thermal conduits that were designed for smooth, even distribution, not for frequent directional shifts. It's like watching currents in an ocean change direction without warning. Upstairs in the city, a handful of residents experience something more noticeable. During a nighttime walk along an elevated observation platform, a couple pauses as they feel the air warm around them. Not like a gust of wind, but like the sudden presence of a radiant heater switching on somewhere unseen. It lasts only a second, barely long enough to question, before fading away. They dismiss it, assuming it's a malfunctioning vent, but there are no vents near that platform. No air outlets, no machinery, just the inner surface of the Dyson Sphere and the panels overhead, which are beginning to vibrate at frequencies too low to hear, frequencies that make the air shimmer imperceptibly. These vibrations are the sphere's attempt to self-correct, shifting heat away from the unstable region, pulsing energy outward in a rhythmic pattern that grows slightly stronger each day. The city still feels safe, still feels calm, still feels like a sanctuary wrapped around a star. But heat is the first sign that harmony is cracking, the first breath of a system that is starting to suffocate under its own brilliance. And though no one sees it yet, the Dyson Sphere is warming in places it shouldn't, changing in ways it never has. And every fractional increase in temperature is another step toward a chain reaction hidden deep within its engineered perfection. The artificial light cycle inside the Dyson Sphere, its perfectly engineered day and night, is not just a matter of aesthetics or environmental control. It is the psychological backbone of the entire civilization living within the inner shell. Humans evolved under a rising and setting sun, with circadian rhythms calibrated to the slow dance of light across the sky, and the architects of the sphere knew that even in a world illuminated by a captive star, people needed the illusion of a natural cycle to remain grounded. For centuries, the panels responsible for dimming and brightening the star's glow have shifted with absolute grace, slowly softening the light during artificial dusk until the interior world fades into a gentle darkness that soothes the mind into sleep. But now, for the first time in generations, the cycle begins to skip, not dramatically, not violently, but with the kind of inconsistency that unsettles the subconscious long before the conscious mind catches up. It begins with a subtle brightness that persists just a moment too long after the dark cycle initiates. A faint golden haze that clings to the horizon-like curvature of the inner surface before fully disappearing. Most residents don't notice it. They simply blink a few extra times as they settle into their nighttime routines, sensing nothing more than the afterglow of a long day. But the next night, the brightness lingers slightly longer, enough that some people wake during the darkest hours to a dim shimmer filtering through their windows, soft enough to be ignored, but strong enough to interfere with melatonin production. Children begin waking earlier than usual, complaining of strange dreams or feeling too energized at bedtime. Adults report difficulty falling asleep, a sense that their body is out of sync, as though the night never fully settled. A few insomniacs take late-night walks and notice something peculiar, shadows briefly appearing under their feet, even though there should be no light source at all. These shadows vanish quickly, within seconds, but they leave behind a sense of disorientation, as if the world's rhythm has missed a beat. Meanwhile, in districts farther from the failing panel, the opposite effect occurs. Light dims too quickly during dusk, plunging areas into deep twilight earlier than intended. Residents in those regions describe the atmosphere as heavy, as if time is trying to slow down around them. Plants in certain botanical sectors fold their leaves prematurely, reacting to a light drop they interpret as winter's onset. Automated systems respond by gently adjusting temperatures upward, trying to compensate for what they read as an anomalous cold spike. But the issue is not temperature, it's the cycle itself. The Dyson Sphere's internal AI tries to correct the imbalance, adjusting adjacent panels to align the light pattern back to its programmed rhythm. But each correction forces another area into a counter-adjustment, like a conductor trying to steady an orchestra that has begun to drift off tempo. The sphere's interior becomes a mosaic of slightly mismatched light phases. Some districts glowing in soft pre-dawn hues, while others still bask in the golden brightness of mid-afternoon, even though their cycles should be unified. Residents attempt to normalize these inconsistencies. They tell themselves they're simply tired, or that system maintenance is underway. But the dissonance begins to grow. Cafes open earlier because people are waking earlier. Markets stay lit longer because dusk feels shorter. Work schedules slide unintentionally as individuals adjust to their own shifted rhythms. Doctors see an uptick in sleep-related complaints, headaches, and anxiety triggered by the inconsistencies in light exposure, though no one yet connects the symptoms to the failing panels. High above the city, in the vast, curving interior sky, the star no longer dims smoothly, but flickers ever so slightly, like a heartbeat trying to stay steady under strain. Atmospheric processes register the imbalance too. Cloud layers rise higher than normal, drifting sluggishly across zones where the light cycle is desynchronized. In some regions, a thin mist forms unexpectedly at night, illuminated faintly by residual light leaking through the compromised panels, creating ghost-like veils over lakes and forests that draw curious onlookers but unsettle them in ways they can't explain. The psychological effect intensifies subtly. Humans are creatures of rhythm, of pattern, of predictable cues. When those cues shift, even by fractions, the body senses it. People feel restless during hours when they normally feel calm. Others grow overly lethargic during supposed daylight. A sense of timelessness, once a soothing trait of life inside the sphere, slowly morphs into temporal confusion. The interior world loses its natural cadence, and as the cycle continues to break apart, the sphere's systems work harder each day to simulate the illusion of control. But it is an illusion, and it is fading. The failing panel is no longer just an engineering flaw. It's the first fracture in the psychological stability of an entire civilization. And somewhere, buried deep within the sphere's thermal regulators, the imbalance grows 1 degree, 1 lumen, 1 microsecond at a time, quiet, hidden, persistent, moving the Dyson Sphere closer to a tipping point no one inside is prepared to face. The first official investigation begins quietly, almost reluctantly, initiated not by panic, but by curiosity, because the Dyson Sphere is so resilient, so mathematically perfect, that the idea of a systemic failure feels impossible to its inhabitants. Still, a handful of engineers working in the deep infrastructure levels of the sphere notice a pattern they cannot ignore. The frequency of stabilizer corrections, the thermal ripples spreading in irregular arcs, the mismatched light cycles, all subtle on their own, but unmistakably connected when examined together. The command to investigate originates from a climate analytics center located near the sphere's inner curvature, where researchers studying atmospheric fluctuations submit a report highlighting anomalies that can't be explained by routine drift. A maintenance team is dispatched to inspect the region associated with the persistent thermal spikes, descending into the narrow access corridors that run behind the internal panel arrays, spaces few humans ever visit because drones usually handle this level of diagnostics. As the team navigates the dimly lit tunnels, they expect the familiar sights: smooth walls, cool air, the gentle hum of regulators. Instead, they find a noticeable warmth radiating from deeper within the structure, a warmth that grows in intensity as they approach the problematic sector. When they reach the first inspection hatch, one of the engineers places a hand on the surface and immediately recoils. The metal is almost feverish. The sensors embedded in their suits confirm a local temperature exceeding safe levels for that region by more than 2 degrees. It's not enough to be dangerous to humans, but it's dangerously high for the sphere's internal systems. They open the hatch and are met with a wave of heated air, accompanied by a faint, pulsing vibration that travels through their boots, through the railings, through the structure itself. It feels like the tremor of a machine working far harder than intended. With flashlights cutting through the hazy glow, the team enters the chamber behind the panel assembly. What they find stops them cold. One of the light regulation panels, a segment spanning several kilometers, shows a microscopic lattice deformation, barely visible to the naked eye but unmistakable under diagnostic scanning. Thin, shimmering fractures spiderweb across its surface, each one no wider than a hair, but extending in patterns that suggest stress building from beneath. These micro-fissures should be impossible. The panels are designed to withstand astronomical forces. Yet here they are, growing slowly like cracks in glass under rising pressure. The diagnostic drones, summoned automatically by the team's presence, project holographic overlays mapping the thermal signature of the fractures. Heat is pooling behind them, building in pockets that pulse with each rotational shift of the sphere. Worse, the fractures appear to be spreading, not rapidly but steadily, their growth synchronized with the sphere's stabilizer corrections. Each time the sphere adjusts its rotation, the stress redistributes across the panel, feeding the fissures like veins, drawing energy from a beating heart. The engineering team attempts real-time repairs, deploying micro-bonding patches designed to reinforce stressed areas. But the moment the patches adhere, the underlying structure shifts subtly, resisting the correction as if something deeper is pushing outward. It's not that the repairs fail, it's that the fissures behave like symptoms rather than sources, mere indicators of a larger hidden issue. When the team submits their logs to the central AI, the system cross-references thousands of data streams: rotational alignment, thermal load, atmospheric pressure, photonic flux, energy redistribution. The conclusion it generates is vague yet chilling. Persistent structural strain detected. Origin indeterminate. Recommend escalation. The report triggers a secondary investigation. Higher-level engineers access long-range, strain monitoring instruments, tools used only during initial construction, to measure the sphere's internal tension. They expect smooth readouts. They find oscillations instead. Tiny rhythmic surges of energy travel across the inner shell like ripples on a cosmic drum, radiating outward from the sector where the panel is failing. These surges coincide perfectly with the stabilizer firings. This means the sphere isn't just wobbling, it's absorbing too much energy in one region and redistributing it in waves, straining the structural bonds in a way the designers never intended. Meanwhile, residents on the surface continue their lives, unaware that beneath their feet the world's backbone is beginning to crack. But a few observant citizens start to notice strange phenomena. Buildings in certain districts emit soft ticks of expansion and contraction during the night. Magnetic transit pods occasionally sway sideways as if caught in unseen gusts. Quiet areas hum faintly with vibrations no natural environment should produce. A maintenance worker in a residential tower reports that her tools heat faster when stored near the outer wall. She assumes it's faulty insulation. She has no idea that the wall is slowly warming because the panel behind it is struggling to dissipate the excess energy accumulating in its fractured layers. The investigation widens, but answers remain elusive. The microfissures are not caused by physical impact. They're not caused by cosmic interference. They're not caused by material fatigue. They're caused by something the sphere was never designed to handle: localized energy saturation, an overload so slight at first that millions of automated checks missed it. The Dyson Sphere is absorbing more energy from its star than it can safely redistribute. And the first place it manifests is here, behind this cracked panel, beneath these overheated chambers, inside a system so vast that a problem the size of a molecule can grow into a threat the size of a civilization. And for the first time since its creation, the Sphere's engineers whisper the word no one has ever dared speak: failure. The truth reveals itself not in a dramatic explosion or a catastrophic alarm, but in a quiet shift in the Sphere's energy distribution logs, numbers that should never change under normal operation. A research analyst monitoring deep system diagnostics notices it first. A region of the Dyson Sphere is absorbing more energy than its panels are releasing. At a glance, it looks like a glitch, a minor computational error. But when she compares the data to real-time readings from the thermal grids, she realizes the numbers match perfectly. The sphere isn't glitching, it's saturating, slowly, silently, dangerously. And the moment she submits her findings, the central AI begins correlating thousands of data clusters, mapping heat signatures, panel alignment, stabilizer activity, energy flux, cooling cycles, atmospheric shifts. The conclusion is terrifying in its simplicity. The Dyson Sphere is storing energy faster than it can dissipate it. This megastructure, the greatest technological achievement in human history, a world built around a star, has become a bottle with no release valve. The energy from the star continues to pour in, unstoppable, unchanging, relentless. But because one region of panels has begun to misalign by microscopic degrees, their ability to filter and reroute radiation has dropped just enough to cause a thermal backlog. The excess heat flows into deeper layers of the structure, overloading thermal conduits not designed for sustained overcapacity, spreading like slow, invisible fire. Cooling systems that once operated in perfect harmony now fight desperately to compensate, rerouting heat to secondary and tertiary channels that hum louder with each passing hour. But the sphere is too vast and the energy too immense. Even a fractional misalignment becomes catastrophic when magnified across a structure millions of kilometers wide. Worse, the saturation isn't remaining localized, it's spreading. Tiny deviations in that one damaged panel are forcing adjacent panels to take on more load, causing them to heat slightly as well. Their sensors activate cooling cycles earlier, more often. Their actuators shift more aggressively. Their stabilizer thrusters fire more frequently to compensate for the new imbalances, and with each adjustment, more energy is stored before it can be redistributed, creating a self-amplifying loop the designers never anticipated. The AI runs predictive models, and the results are devastating. If the saturation continues at this rate, the Dyson Sphere will reach a thermal tipping point. Not tomorrow, not next hour, but soon. The star at the center produces unimaginable power every second, and for millions of cycles, the sphere has captured and guided it with elegance. But now, with even a sliver of its regulatory system compromised, the sphere is behaving like a sealed oven around a sun. If it overheats, the consequences will be catastrophic. The panels could warp irreversibly, structural bonds could weaken, cooling reservoirs could fail, stabilizers could lose the ability to counterbalance the accumulating stress. In the worst scenario, The sphere could fracture, splitting along its tension lines like the shell of an overpressurized vessel, unleashing a tidal wave of stellar radiation that would vaporize entire regions and send fragments of the inner world careening into the star. But even the second-worst scenario is terrifying. The sphere could deform just enough to expose a city to raw sunlight, an intensity no life form or structure inside could survive. The engineers reviewing the findings feel the weight of this revelation settle in their chests like cold lead. They've always known that the Dyson Sphere required perfection, but they never imagined perfection could fail so quietly. For the first time, the lights inside the investigation hub flicker, not dramatically, but in a strange, rhythmic way, matching the pulse of energy saturating behind the damaged panel. It is as if the sphere itself is breathing too hard, struggling to keep its internal systems aligned while drowning in its own brilliance. Meanwhile, on the surface, the citizens remain unaware of the looming danger. They walk beneath the curvature of their artificial world, marveling at the stillness, the beauty, the glow of the star suspended above them. They do not know that the glow is fractionally brighter, fractionally hotter, fractionally more unstable. They cannot see the data models showing that the sphere is approaching a point of no return. The AI initiates an emergency protocol, the first in the sphere's history. Not an evacuation, not a shutdown. Something far more desperate, an attempt to bleed energy from the inner layers by forcing a partial shift in the panel arrays, a maneuver never intended to be executed in real-world conditions. But the AI knows the truth. There is no safe alternative. The Dyson Sphere, this cosmic sanctuary of engineered perfection, this cradle of life wrapped around a star, has reached the edge of its design limits. And unless drastic action is taken, the smallest problem no one expected will soon become the greatest threat humanity has ever faced: the slow, unstoppable drowning of a world in its own stolen sunlight. The collapse of a Dyson Sphere does not begin with a dramatic explosion or a flashing alarm. It begins with a shift so subtle that only the sphere itself feels it. Deep below the surface, in layers of alloy and cooling veins, the structure groans under pressure no one can hear. Energy saturates the inner lattice faster than the regulators can bleed it away, and although the temperature increase remains measured in fractions of degrees, the stress it places upon the megastructure grows exponentially. The models generated by the AI show what the engineers are too afraid to say aloud. The Dyson Sphere has entered the earliest stage of structural runaway. In this phase, heat doesn't simply accumulate, it feeds itself. It causes microscopic expansions, which distort the alignment of panels, which cause more heat to pool, which increases the expansion again, creating a loop of accelerating tension that blossoms like a silent supernova beneath the surface. The sphere's internal stabilizers fire more intensely, working desperately to keep the rotation perfectly even, but the corrections only temporarily hide the underlying instability. The holographic maps inside the engineering hub now show entire regions glowing in soft red hues. Areas where the inner shell is beginning to bend, not dramatically, but enough to cause structural bonds to stretch beyond their tolerance. The AI predicts that if the saturation continues for another 20 cycles, the thermal load will exceed safe limits by 4%. At 4%, the cooling networks will begin to fail. At 7%, the stabilizers will become overburdened, causing rotational jitter that destabilizes atmospheric patterns. At 10%, the tension lines stitched through the sphere's lattice will begin to buckle, creating deformation waves that ripple across the interior like wrinkles on a tightening drum. At 12%, the catastrophic scenarios begin. In one model, a region of the inner shell caves inward, exposing a city to direct stellar radiation. The inhabitants would have less than 30 seconds before temperatures hit lethal levels. In another, the sphere warps outward, cracking the panel network and allowing unfiltered solar plasma to erupt into the interior, igniting oxygen and flaring across the habitat zones. The worst model, however, is not the most violent, it is the quietest. In this scenario, the sphere becomes so saturated with energy that its internal systems simply fail to regulate the pressure. The cooling networks collapse, the thermal conduits melt from within, and the sphere begins to deform in slow motion, bending under its own stored brilliance until it tears along its tension lines. The tear exposes the star fully, and the inner world is bathed in a blast of radiation brighter than anything humans have ever witnessed. The engineers know these possibilities. They watch the simulations play out in silence, each one worse than the last. The AI recommends immediate intervention, a massive, coordinated release of energy through controlled panel opening. But that solution comes with its own risk. Opening a panel deliberately exposes the sphere to raw stellar output. The sphere must withstand that assault long enough to vent the accumulated heat and restore equilibrium. If the panel fails during the opening, it could trigger the very collapse they are trying to prevent. But if they do nothing, collapse becomes inevitable. Meanwhile, subtle signs of the instability reach the citizens on the surface. The artificial sky flickers for a full second, long enough for people to freeze mid-step, staring upward in confusion. The gentle hum of the environmental grid grows louder at intervals, like a mechanical heartbeat faltering. In one region, the gravity shifts imperceptibly, causing glasses to vibrate on tables and small objects to drift for a moment before falling back into place. Atmospheric flow irregularities intensify. Breezes stop abruptly, then return with chaotic bursts. In the agricultural sectors, water droplets suspended in misting systems fall faster than usual, as if gravity is fluctuating microscopically. The behavioral shifts among the population are equally telling. People report headaches, restlessness, and a growing sense of unease as their circadian rhythms collapse under the failing light cycle. Emergency lines receive scattered reports of disorientation, nausea, and sudden anxiety. No one yet understands the cause. They assume a glitch in environmental programming. They have no idea they are living inside a world-sized pressure cooker reaching its threshold. In the deeper levels of the sphere, the engineers finally locate a terrifying pattern: thermal shockwaves, miniature pulses of heat, rippling across the panel network every 3 hours, spreading outward from the damaged region like seismic aftershocks in a planetary body. These shock waves gradually intensify as the energy saturation increases, adding new fissures to the lattice and widening the existing ones. Each pulse is small, nearly invisible, but their repetition is catastrophic. They mark the march towards structural failure. The AI sends its final unambiguous warning to the engineers: energy saturation trend irreversible without intervention, critical state approaching. For the first time since the sphere was built, the engineers gather in the emergency chamber, staring at the glowing red maps that represent the internal wounds spreading under their feet. The Dyson Sphere, this universe-sized sanctuary, this miracle of human engineering, is becoming unstable. The collapse has not begun yet, but every model agrees it is coming. And unless they act now, unless they risk everything to relieve the pressure building inside the shell, the sphere will cross its point of no return. And no amount of brilliance, no amount of technology, no amount of human ingenuity will be able to save the world they've built around a star. The decision to intervene does not come easily. For generations, the Dyson Sphere has been a symbol of flawless human achievement, a world where nothing breaks, nothing decays, nothing falls out of balance. To admit that it is now failing feels like a betrayal of everything the civilization stands for. Yet the engineers know the truth. Inaction is no longer an option. The first emergency meeting in centuries begins beneath the inner shell, deep inside a secure control chamber surrounded by layers of thermal shielding. Holographic projections hover above the circular table, showing pulsing red zones where energy saturation has exceeded acceptable thresholds. The maps flicker with each new reading, reflecting the sphere's ongoing struggle to stabilize itself. The AI explains the situation in calm, emotionless tones. Energy redistribution at 134% of expected load. Cooling networks at 91% capacity. Stabilizer thruster activity increased by 400% in the affected region. Structural strain rising. Collapse trajectory confirmed. The room goes silent. The engineers understand the implications better than anyone. The sphere is approaching a runaway condition. If nothing is done, the internal pressure will increase until the megastructure deforms catastrophically. The only viable solution is a controlled release of energy, a maneuver so dangerous it was theorized only in emergency manuals, never intended to be attempted. The plan involves forcibly shifting a section of the panel network outward, creating a narrow vent that exposes part of the inner shell to raw stellar radiation for several minutes. This would allow the built-up energy to escape into space, relieving the internal pressure and giving the sphere a chance to return to equilibrium. But the risks are enormous. If the vent opens too quickly, the heat could warp the surrounding panels, causing a cascade of structural failures. If it opens too slowly, the release won't be enough to stop the runaway saturation. If the stabilizers misfire even slightly during the operation, the sphere could twist, letting the star's full intensity blast directly into the habitat zones. Even the cooling systems beneath the vent could melt under the sudden surge of temperature. It is a gamble with an entire world as the stakes. While the engineers debate the risks, the sphere continues to strain around them. Another thermal shockwave ripples through the internal lattice, this one stronger, spreading farther, leaving a faint vibration in the floor. In the city above, people feel the tremor as a soft rumble that shakes loose dust from rooftops and sends ripples across lakes. The artificial sky flickers sharply, startling thousands as if the star momentarily gasped. Enhanced atmospheric sensors send urgent alerts. Wind patterns are collapsing, pressure zones are drifting unpredictably, and humidity levels spike and crash within minutes. The world is unraveling. The engineers no longer have a choice. The lead coordinator, her voice steady despite the tremors underfoot, gives the command, "Prepare the extraction aperture." Immediately, the control chamber comes alive. Robotic arms adjust the holographic schematics, selecting the region where the vent will open, far from population centers, close to the failing panel, and aligned with the sphere's rotational axis to minimize distortion. Stabilizers across the megastructure shift into a synchronized pattern, firing in microbursts to lock the sphere's rotation as tightly as possible. Cooling networks redirect their flow, evacuating heat from the vent region to reduce the chance of catastrophic melting when the aperture forms. The AI initiates a countdown sequence. Preparatory alignment, 60 cycles. As the sphere prepares, the effects above intensify. People step outside their homes, confused by the sudden warmth rising from the ground, by the changing tint of the sky, by the unnatural silence that falls between atmospheric pulses. Some look upward and swear they see something, an almost invisible ripple shimmering across the sky's curvature, as though the world itself is breathing harder. Word spreads quickly, markets close early, transit pods stall. Entire districts go dark for a full second as the light cycle glitches violently, then restabilizes in a washed-out gold. No one understands what is happening, but fear spreads quietly, subtly, like a shadow passing over the collective consciousness. Meanwhile, the engineers complete the alignment. Massive locking mechanisms engage in the outer hull. Panels shift, tilt, and retract in coordinated patterns, exposing layers beneath that haven't seen raw starlight since the sphere's creation. The chamber heats slightly as thermal readings spike across the board. "Aperture ready," the AI announces, awaiting final authorization. The lead engineer hesitates only a moment. She looks at the simulation again, at the branching lines predicting collapse. Then she gives the final order: open it. And with that, the Dyson Sphere begins the most dangerous maneuver in its existence, a desperate attempt to save itself by releasing the very energy it was built to contain, gambling the fate of its civilization on a vent that may restore stability or trigger the destruction they've tried so hard to avoid. The opening of the extraction aperture begins in absolute silence, an eerie stillness that settles over the Dyson Sphere, as if the entire megastructure is holding its breath. Deep within the control chamber, the engineers watch as the holographic projection displays the first microscopic shift of the panel array designated for release. The chosen region, an enormous segment miles across, begins to separate from its neighbors in a slow, deliberate unfurling. Tiny actuators, no bigger than grains of dust, initiate the sequence, but each one controls forces equivalent to continental drift. The inner layer of the sphere's shell peels back like a colossal metallic eyelid, revealing a thin seam of blinding light beneath. Instantly, thermal sensors scream upward, painting the chamber's displays in violent shades of gold and crimson. Stabilizer thrusters around the entire sphere fire in synchronized bursts, counteracting the sudden torque created by the aperture's movement. Far above, in the inhabited surface regions, people feel a tremor roll beneath their feet, the soft, unsettling sensation of their world shifting in ways no one understands. Those who look toward the artificial sky see a strange phenomenon, a faint line of radiance carving itself across the curved horizon, glowing brighter than anything they've ever seen. They don't know it, but they are witnessing the first leak of raw, stellar energy bleeding through the opening vent. In the control chamber, the AI counts down the aperture expansion. 2%, 3%, 4%. As the panels retract further, a flood of incandescent plasma pours into the venting channels, racing along the cooling conduits designed to withstand only brief exposures to such temperatures. The conduits groan under the pressure, vibrating violently as they funnel the energy away from the sphere's interior. The lead engineer monitors the readings with wide eyes. The thermal load is rising faster than predicted. They expected a surge, but not this magnitude. The star is far more volatile at close range than any model prepared them for. Still, the maneuver continues. The aperture widens to 6%, then 7%. At this stage, light spills through the vent like molten glass, creating a beam that lances out into space, a stream of pure, stellar fury that had been trapped within the sphere for far too long. On the inner surface, residents fall to their knees in shock as the sky suddenly blooms with a radiant, unnatural glow. Some pray, thinking this is the beginning of the end. Others scream as the air around them heats by several degrees in an instant. Environmental regulators race to flood the habitat zones with cooler air, but the fluctuations are too fast. Lakes ripple under sudden thermal expansion. Forests sway unpredictably as heat pockets drift across the sphere like wandering ghosts. Meanwhile, the aperture continues to widen. At 9%, the stabilizers begin to struggle, firing in chaotic patterns as the sphere tilts dangerously under the uneven force. The AI warns of rotational instability, prompting emergency thrusters on the opposite side of the sphere to ignite in massive cannon-like bursts, stabilizing the structure at the brink of a catastrophic wobble. The engineers grit their teeth, sweat beading on their skin as they fight to keep control. They review the stress maps repeatedly, watching red zones flare and fade as the sphere flexes under the immense strain. But then, finally, something changes. Thermal readings begin to drop. Slowly, barely perceptibly, but undeniably. The heat saturation curve softens, its upward trajectory beginning to flatten. The excess energy trapped for so long inside the sphere is pouring out into space, thinning the heat walls that once threatened to collapse the megastructure. The AI announces the first positive reading: internal temperature decreasing, cooling network stabilizing, structural tension declining. Relief washes across the control chamber, but it is short-lived. A sudden shockwave erupts from the aperture, an eruption of stellar plasma not anticipated in any simulation. The beam of light flickers, expands, and lashes against the edges of the vent, sending a blast of heat through the panel array. The sphere shudders violently, panels buckle, entire clusters of actuators overload. The engineers watch in horror as the aperture threatens to unravel into an uncontrolled breach. If that happens, the star's full intensity will blast the interior world with lethal radiation. With no time to hesitate, the lead engineer overrides the AI's safety protocols and orders the emergency reinforcement shields to deploy. Gigantic, spiderweb-like structures of reflective alloy shoot across the aperture's edges, absorbing the shockwave and redirecting the plasma storm back into space. The maneuver works, but at a cost. The edge panels glow white-hot from the strain, and several actuator clusters melt, fusing into twisted sculptures of charred metal. But the aperture holds. The shockwave subsides, and once again, the energy release stabilizes. A long silence follows. Then, gradually, the thermal readings drop further. Atmospheric pressure begins to normalize. Gravity fluctuations fade. The sphere stops trembling, and one by one, the red zones on the holographic map shrink. The Dyson Sphere, battered and trembling, has successfully opened a window into its own star, and for the first time in a long time, the world inside can breathe again. But the aperture is still open, and closing it safely will be an even greater challenge. For a moment, the sphere seems frozen in time, caught between salvation and destruction, as the aperture stands open like a brilliant wound carved into the inner shell. Then, without warning, the star at the center surges. A tide of light erupts outward, brighter than anything the inhabitants have ever witnessed. A tsunami of radiance that slams into the venting channels with the force of a cosmic heartbeat. The extraction aperture becomes a blazing corridor of molten gold, stretching from the star's surface to the void beyond the sphere. Superheated plasma streams through the opening in a shimmering cascade, pouring out billions of joules per second in a concentrated torrent that blinds the external senses and floods the cooling networks with thermal overload signals. Yet despite the overwhelming intensity, something miraculous begins to happen. The internal temperature continues to fall. The megastructure, straining, trembling, creaking under stresses vast enough to tear mountains apart, begins to relax, its thermal walls shedding the pressure that had been suffocating the inner world. And as the sphere stabilizes, the artificial sky comes alive. Across the city, residents look upward in awe and terror as the entire horizon ignites in a sweeping wave of gold, as if dawn were racing across the curved surface at impossible speed. Light spills over forests, mountains, and oceans, painting the landscape with an ethereal glow. Lakes glitter like liquid mirrors. Towers shine as if carved from molten crystal. For the first time since the sphere was built, they witness something beyond the engineered illusion of sunrise. They witness raw starlight escaping, filtered not for comfort, but for survival. Atmospheric processes scramble to compensate as temperatures spike briefly, causing clouds to evaporate in seconds and reform moments later as sheets of vapor pulled by the sudden pressure shifts. Winds howl through the corridors of the city, bending trees and scattering loose debris as the inner atmosphere reacts to the abrupt imbalance. People cling to railings, to walls, to each other, their faces illuminated by a glow so intense it casts shadows across the curved landscape. Some think it is the end, others think it is a revelation. But all of them understand instinctively that they are witnessing the Dyson Sphere fighting for its life. Meanwhile, in the control chamber, the engineers monitor the internal tension lines as they shrink, recalibrating with each passing second. Cooling conduits begin to operate within safe ranges again. Stabilizers fire less frequently. The deadly rise in structural strain that once threatened collapse now reverses course. The sphere is healing, but the process is far from gentle. Just as the aperture stabilizes, a second shockwave erupts from the star, stronger, hotter, more erratic than the first. It slams into the venting region and forces the sphere to absorb the blow. The reinforcement shields glow white-hot, bending under the force. One of them fractures, sending a plume of plasma spiraling into the upper atmosphere before dissipating harmlessly. But it's enough to shake the entire inner world. Cities rumble, structures sway. Magnetic rails temporarily lose alignment, causing transit pods to stall in mid-air. Waves rise and crash against synthetic shorelines as the sphere's gravity dips and rebounds. Then, slowly, the shock wave fades, the aperture holds, and with the star's outburst exhausted, the energy release transforms from violent torrent to steady stream. The light softens, the beam narrows, the chamber readings begin to flatten, indicating that the worst is over. But the visual spectacle has only just begun. As the star relaxes back into its normal rhythm, the interior of the sphere is filled with the most breathtaking phenomenon anyone has ever seen, a false dawn that stretches across every horizon at once. Instead of rising from one direction, the light expands outward from the aperture in circular ripples, creating layered rings of brightness that wash over the interior like the blooming of a colossal flower. Entire continents of the inner shell glow in unison. Clouds turn to gold-edged curtains. Even the tallest towers reflect the radiance in bands of shimmering white. For a brief, unforgettable moment, the inhabitants see the true nature of the world they live in, a hollow sanctuary orbiting a star, fragile yet magnificent, capable of channeling celestial fury into controlled brilliance. Children weep, elders kneel. Scientists stare in stunned silence at a spectacle no equation could prepare them for. And then, gradually, inevitably, the light begins to dim. The star stabilizes. The sphere cools. The aperture's blazing wound softens into a warm, lingering glow. The internal systems, once pushed to the brink of collapse, return to equilibrium as the last of the excess energy spills gently into space. The Dyson Sphere has survived. But the aperture is still open, and closing it safely may be the most delicate challenge yet. This moment, this breathtaking cosmic sunrise, is not the victory. It is merely the turning point. The world has been saved from immediate destruction, but one wrong move, one miscalculation during the closure sequence could undo everything they have fought for. The sphere breathes a sigh of relief, but the danger isn't over. As the last waves of excess energy bleed through the aperture and the star settles into its familiar rhythm, the Dyson Sphere enters a phase it has not experienced since its creation: recovery. The emergency glow slowly fades from the artificial sky, replaced by the soft, golden illumination the inhabitants have always known. But everything feels different now. The air carries a cool sharpness as the atmospheric regulators restore balance, purging the heat pockets that drifted unpredictably through the inner environment. The winds calm, the gravity stabilizes, the trembling in the shell subsides until the sphere's vast curvature once again feels steady beneath the feet of its people. Across the habitat zones, life cautiously resumes. Markets reopen. Transit pods glide back onto their magnetic tracks. Families step outside to examine the world with new eyes, still haunted by the memory of the brilliant false dawn that consumed the interior. Gardens that wilted under the sudden heat revive as nutrient systems kick back into steady flow. Sensitive plants that curled in confusion begin lifting their leaves again, adjusting to the restored light cycle. Engineers deploy fleets of drones across the inner surface, mapping every centimeter of the megastructure for new microfissures. Some sections bear the scars of the crisis, faint scorch marks from the plasma shockwaves, warped edges along panel seams, actuator clusters fused under extreme heat. But most of the inner shell remains intact, thanks to the stabilizer's relentless efforts and the precision of the venting operation. The cooling reservoirs, once dangerously close to failure, now return to their normal operating temperatures. Their internal channels whisper with rhythmic pulses, moving heat through redesigned routes that the AI recalibrates in real time, optimizing for long-term stability. In the engineering chamber, a sense of triumph mingles with exhaustion. The lead team reviews data streams showing the sphere's internal tension, dropping back into safe parameters. The AI displays a restored equilibrium curve. Imperfect, still fragile, but trending toward complete stability. The panel arrays that survived the crisis reorient themselves with slow, elegant movements, aligning to match the recovery cycle now programmed into the sphere's core. For the first time since the warning signs began, the engineers allow themselves to breathe. Outside, the citizens gather along observation terraces near the upward curving horizon, drawn by the strange serenity that follows catastrophe. Many saw the artificial sunrise from locations across the sphere, and though they did not understand its meaning, they felt its power, a reminder that their world is not a simple sanctuary, but a living machine orbiting the heart of a star. They speak of the event with a mixture of fear and awe, trying to describe the way the sky flared open as if revealing a secret too immense for human comprehension. Philosophers and scientists spread across the city debate the implications. Some argue that the crisis proves the need for greater understanding of the sphere's systems. Others believe it is a testament to the fragility of engineered perfection, that even the greatest human creation can falter under forces beyond their anticipation. And then there are those who see the event as something spiritual, a cosmic message delivered through radiant light. In schools, children stare at holographic projections of the Dyson Sphere, their teachers attempting to explain what happened in calm, simplified terms. They show how the sphere stabilized itself, how the star's power had to be released, how the world nearly reached a point of no return. The children listen wide-eyed, imagining the sphere as a gigantic guardian that sacrificed part of itself to protect them. Meanwhile, the control teams turn their focus to the next critical task, closing the aperture. With the sphere stabilized, the window cannot remain open indefinitely. Every second it remains exposed, the panels directly surrounding it endure immense radiation stress. The reinforcement shields glow a dull red, their surfaces cooling slowly but still radiating the silent heat of the star. Engineers run simulations repeatedly. Closing the aperture too quickly could create a sudden pressure spike, risking destabilization. Closing it too slowly could allow heat to build back up. The solution must be precise, delicate enough to avoid shocking the sphere's internal systems, but decisive enough to seal the wound before microfractures spread further. While the teams prepare for the closure sequence, the sphere continues to heal. Atmospheric flow returns to predictable patterns, forming clouds that drift along their programmed routes. Lakes settle into calm, mirror-like surfaces, reflecting the golden interior glow. Birds engineered for the interior environment resume their flights, no longer confused by the erratic changes in light. Even the star at the center seems calmer, its surface pulsing with a steady rhythm that radiates through the sphere like a cosmic heartbeat. And in that calm, the inhabitants begin to grasp the enormity of what they survived. For generations, the Dyson Sphere was more myth than machine, a world that felt eternal. Now they understand its truth. It is magnificent, but not invincible. It can bend, it can strain, it can suffer, but it can also recover. It can fight back. And if they respect its limits, this colossal creation may continue to shield them for millennia more. The engineers complete their preparations for the final phase. The aperture stands open like a glowing scar across the curvature of the inner world, slowly cooling, but still dangerous. The sphere is stable, but fragile. The next maneuver will determine its fate. The closure of the aperture unfolds with a grace that belies the danger surrounding it. A final engineering ballet performed across the inner curvature of a world that has come closer to extinction than its inhabitants will ever fully comprehend. The engineers initiate the sequence with trembling hands, watching as the vast panels, now cooled and restructured, begin to shift into motion. Slowly, cautiously, they glide toward one another, narrowing the open wound that once poured stellar fury into the void. The actuators hum with quiet determination, pulling the metallic eyelids shut an inch at a time. Stabilizers fire in gentle, rhythmic bursts to maintain rotational balance, and the sphere vibrates with a low-frequency resonance, like the deep inhale of a being that has endured immense pain and now prepares to rest. As the panels move, the interior world watches. Citizens gather on balconies and high terraces, gazing upward at the fading glow that arcs across the horizon like the afterimage of a dream. Some of them remember the heat, the trembling, the blinding false dawn. Others saw none of it directly but feel its weight in the stories already spreading through the city. The stories of a world that almost broke, of a star that pressed too hard against its cage, of engineers who opened a door no human was ever meant to touch. The closure narrows the aperture to a thin, brilliant line, and for a moment, that line looks like a stitch of light sewing the sky back together. Then, with one final coordinated motion, the panels seal completely. The reinforcements lock. The actuators cool. The Dyson Sphere becomes whole again. A soft pulse ripples through the artificial sky, a subtle shift in the golden glow as systems synchronize back into harmony. Atmospheric regulators release a final cleansing breath of cool air that drifts across the cities and forests, settling into the curvature like a sigh of relief. Within minutes, the world regains its familiar equilibrium. Light returns to its perfect rhythm. Winds resume their gentle patterns. Lakes and rivers reflect the calm, warm glow of a star now safely contained. Life begins again, not as it was, but with a deeper awareness of fragility, a deeper appreciation of the balance that keeps their sanctuary alive. In the control chamber, the engineers slump back in their chairs, exhausted but victorious. The AI confirms full system stability, thermal loads within acceptable ranges, stabilizer activity normalized, structural tension returning to baseline. They know the sphere will need repairs, inspections, redesigns. This crisis has revealed weaknesses no one predicted, but the immediate danger has passed. The world is safe for now. Above, as people walk through parks and along the rising curvature of their skyward horizon, many stop to reflect on what they have witnessed. They look at the inner sun with new eyes, understanding for the first time that it is not a gentle star, but a powerful force held in check by layers of precision, technology, and vigilance. A few speak softly about how close they came to catastrophe. Others express astonishment that something as vast as a Dyson Sphere could tremble at all. But most simply stand quietly, feeling the hum of the restored world beneath their feet, grateful for the calm that has returned. And perhaps that is the deeper lesson the crisis has given them. Even in a place where science has conquered the cosmos, where humanity has built a shell around a star, the universe still whispers reminders of humility. Perfection is not permanent. Stability is not guaranteed. Every world, natural or engineered, rests on the edge of forces far greater than itself. And yet, within that delicate balance, there is beauty, there is resilience, there is hope. The Dyson Sphere remains not as an unshakable monument, but as a living testament to humanity's ability to face the unthinkable and endure. Its panels shine once again, its forests breathe, its oceans ripple with reflected gold, and its people go on, wiser than before, knowing that their world survived because they acted, because they listened to the quiet warnings, because they dared to open a door into the heart of a star and close it again. As the artificial day settles peacefully across the interior, the narrator's voice softens. Thank you for exploring this world with us. If you'd like to journey deeper into the mysteries of cosmic engineering, consider subscribing and let me know in the comments what world you want to explore next. And with that final whisper, the Dyson Sphere drifts back into calm equilibrium, its heartbeat steady, its light warm, its horizon endlessly rising toward a star that will shine within it for millennia to come.